Hello, it's me, post-edit Nick. I've made a very long video explaining a bit of the science behind what I put in my bottle on different occasions for different reasons. I'd like for people to watch it and understand when to use what sports nutrition, in my opinion. But if you're just looking at this thinking, I want a recipe for making my own beta fuel for way cheaper, I thought, you know what, I'll cover that straight away. So, this is the summary before we get into the video of what goes in my bottle. Most of the time, water. Pure tap water, I just need to hydrate. When it's going to be a hard effort, white sugar. Lots of white sugar. It is almost good enough for most of the efforts we do almost all the time. If you really need to fuel very efficiently for quite a long time, I make my own sports mix with all of this stuff. Recipe will be on screen now. Maltodex and fructose. Salt, citric acid for flavour, and I put some Bcaas in sometimes. That will be covered. Very, very rarely I use sodium bicarbonate, beta-alanine and creatine for various performance benefits, and that will be covered too. Those are the different things that go in my bottle at different times. Now, we'll get into the long, boring stuff. Hello. Sorry it's been a while since putting a video out. I'll address the elephant in the room straight away. I didn't do a video of the Hill Climb Nationals, and I'm not going to do one. I kept thinking, oh, I could put one together, I could talk about my effort, I could do this and that. One, I'm not really interested in it. Two, I didn't get any footage at all, so there's nothing like interesting to show. And three, I didn't want to sort of join in that hype bandwagon. Everyone was putting out their own videos of Nationals just to get some clicks, and I could have done that. It probably would have been my best ever performing video if I'd have done it 3 days after Nationals, but I couldn't be bothered. Give you a very quick summary. My effort went okay. My prep wasn't perfect, so I ended up doing it having not eaten for about 3 hours beforehand, and that made it hard. I struggled on the final really steep ramp after the downhill, and I lost a little bit of time there. In my personal battle with my mate Alex, he beat me by 9 seconds, and I was just delighted for him. That was really cool. He set off 2 minutes after me, so we got to like regroup at the top and chat about our efforts. And Alex, just a bloody great guy. Really, like, it was so nice having this sort of friendly rivalry all season. The event itself, I don't know if I enjoyed it. Do you know when you're right on your limit, things like having an air horn blasted in your face and a man nearly knocking you off your bike with a massive novelty inhaler. Some people might like that. I would rather have cycled up the hill on my own. People cheering you on is one thing, but God. And then I guess the hype around it. Loads of people who never do hill climbs, really don't know anything about them, immediately feeling qualified to tell me that my bike's heavy as shit and what I've done wrong and what I should have done, and I hate all the noise around it. So I might do Nationals next year, I might not. I came 110th this year and I did 345 watts for the 16 minutes that I was on the hill, which is really good without being remarkable. Okay, there's Nationals done. This is a video based around making your own carbohydrate drink to put in your bottle. We're all familiar with Beta Fuel or Torque or pre-packaged brands, and they're great. I use Beta Fuel. This is not a video to slag off Beta Fuel, but it's very expensive for what it is when you can make your own. What's convenient about it for me is that it comes pre-packaged, so it fits in my back pocket, and if I go out for an 8-hour ride, I can have more nutrition in my pocket ready to go. But if I'm just filling 2 bottles from home, I don't need to spend as much money as Beta Fuel costs, and you can make your own roughly equivalent material for maybe a quarter of the price. I'll say a half just in case, I don't want to oversell, but you can save money, and cycling's expensive, so anytime I can save money on something I can do myself at home, I try and choose to. In case you don't know, I have a PhD in chemistry. I've always been interested in cycling, and I've always been interested in food. I love cooking. It's probably my second hobby after cycling, and I like the science and how that ties in with being a chemist. Like in cycling, I'm wanting to be a thriving human. My current job, this is in no way branded by my current job. It is me personally doing stuff. My current job is for a large consumer goods company who make things like ice cream, a lot of drinks, spreads, pot noodle, I was trying to avoid brands, instant noodles that come in a pot, etc. So I understand some food chemistry, some food formulation as well. There's my credentials. I'm also not an expert, right? I'm not a nutritionist. I don't know the biology side of this as much, apart from being a keen amateur. So I'm not telling you this with authority. I'm telling you this is my understanding of this type of... Personally, I mean, I drink water a lot of the time. Water's obviously the most important thing that goes in a bottle. You need to hydrate. I'm not really a fan of isotonic tablets or anything. I don't like the way they taste. They remind me of that like dissolvable painkiller you used to get when you were a kid. And I've never had any issues not using them. I don't live in a particularly hot, dry place, so I suspect electrolyte replenishment's not too important until I'm on longer rides, and then we'll talk about it. But my general rule is, if I'm riding short enough that I don't need to fuel via my bottle, I probably don't need electrolytes in my bottle, so I just see them as a waste of money. So I either ride with water or with carbs in my bottle. Let's get on to the carbs section. The carb that's in my bottle most of the time is this. Table sugar. It is the cheapest way to keep yourself fueled on the bike. I buy it in 5 kilos because that's how much I get through. If I'm Zwifting for a few hours, I will make this up in a water bottle. And like obscene amounts, I'll do in a 500ml bottle 100 grams and use hot water to dissolve it and almost treat it like a gel. It's like, oh, every mouthful I swig then has lots of carbs. I know people talk about you want to get, 80 grams of carbs an hour, 120 grams of carbs an hour. I have never calculated that. I'll probably never bother calculating that. I can just kind of keep drinking and feel carbed enough. I just put plenty in my bottle and drink as much as I can. Table sugar, sucrose. Sucrose is a disaccharide. Saccharide means sugar in chemistry. Disaccharide means there's 2 building block sugars put together here, and they are glucose and fructose. Now, if you've ever read the bottle of beta fuel or the packet of beta fuel, that's what goes into beta fuel. In here, they're in a perfectly 1-to-1 ratio. Of course they are, because it's a disaccharide, they're stuck together. They have to be 1-to-1. That's not the optimal ratio for fueling of glucose to fructose, but it's bloody close. On top of that, when we're talking about optimal uptake, that's really important if you're an Ineos Grenadier. If you are me, a knobhead on Zwift who is mostly riding at zone 2 with some big hard efforts every now and then, this is more than efficient enough to fuel me. I put it to you, viewer, that 99% of the time you ride and 99% of the time I ride. This is a perfectly efficient way to fuel. It will be able to deliver more fuel to your body than you need for the effort you're doing. And the only time we need to stray into really complicated formulations to increase our carb uptake is when we're doing novelty things. Those few times a year that we're riding 100 miles as fast as we can, or you're doing an all-day endurance ride where you just need to stay on top of the fueling, etc. If you're going out for a few hours with your mates and you want to do some willy-wagging up your local hills, this will be fine. Just use plenty of it, and it is cheap as chips. Okay, moving on to the more complicated nutrition, the more complicated science behind that nutrition though. I've seen a few people say that because this is just glucose and fructose stuck together, it's therefore almost as good. Chemically, that makes my eye twitch, okay? Because stuck together, it's what's called a glycosidic bond. And the first thing your body has to do to get glucose and fructose from sucrose is split that glycosidic bond, and that takes energy. Once they're chemically bonded, that is different. Sodium chloride is sort of sodium and chlorine, but it is not just metallic sodium and gaseous chlorine, right? It's the same thing with sugar. It is not just glucose and fructose mixed together, ready for you. You have to split them. There's enzymatic processes that do that very efficiently in your body, but there is an energy cost, so you were able to absorb fewer calories per gram from sucrose than you would be if you mix glucose and fructose together, even in the same ratios, right? I think that's really important to say. People who tell you to drink fructose, sucrose as an efficient fueling method, I totally agree with. I I just think it's important that we specify. On that note, here's some fructose and here's some maltodextrin. Maltodextrin is what's called a polysaccharide. So I said earlier, saccharide means sugar. Polysaccharide just means lots of sugars stuck together. Maltodextrin, that sugar is glucose. So this is just like long strings of glucose stuck together. It's essentially treated as a means to deliver glucose in a cost-efficient way. I think it's a byproduct of the sugar processing industry. So in this case, we're ignoring the fact that there's a small energy cost in splitting that into individual components. I think there may be grounds for some more research there. I don't know if science in sport do anything along those lines, but as a chemist, first thing I'd be saying is actually when you use a polymeric glucose, does the chain length, for example, change the optimal ratio of glucose to fructose? Fructose is just a slightly different sugar that goes in, that you can absorb via a different route. So rather than just having 100% glucose, if you do glucose and fructose, you can saturate your glucose uptake mechanism and get more sugar in via a fructose uptake mechanism. Just means you can absorb more grams of carbs per hour. And there's been loads of research on this, and initially Science in Sport, their first beta fuel was 2 molecules of glucose for every 1 fructose, I think it was. Actually, it was probably weight. It was probably 2 grams for 1 gram. And that's the most sugar you can take up per hour. They've since refined that, and they said actually you go as high in fructose as 1 to 0.8. I'm just holding 2 bags unlabelled to you. So that just means, in theory, you can take up even more sugar at the same time. I've not done any research on that whatsoever. When I make up my sport mix, I put in 1 maltodextrin to 0.8 fructose because I trust the paper that has said that, and that's all there is to it. So, the simplest sports nutrition sugar that some people have is just 1 maltodextrin to 0.8 fructose, any volume you like at those ratios. So if you want 80 grams in your bottle, that comes out as 46 grams of maltodextrin, 34 grams of fructose. I choose to add some other things, but as a frame of reference, I'm obviously not sponsored by Peak Sups. The reason I'm using these is because this was the cheapest place I could find that sold everything I wanted, so I could order it all in one go, just to save on shipping. And I'll tell you the costs of each of these as we go. So for 80 grams in my bottle, for context, 1 sachet of beta fuel, I think, costs about £2 normally. You can get it on offer for cheaper. But the maltodextrin, 46 grams, costs 25p when you buy it in this size. 36 grams of fructose costs 27p. I've got this written down on my phone. And that would be enough. That would be a sports drink. That would fuel you all day. Something that I do, because that in water is just quite sweet. It's just like sweet, bland nothingness. If you've ever made up sugar water, I'm fine with that. It doesn't make me feel particularly sick. I've trained it. Some people really can't cope. So what I add is salt. Standard table salt. People talk about electrolytes. Standard table salt, absolutely fine. It's recommended that per litre of water you drink when you're doing heavy exercise, you have something between, I think, 300 and 800 milligrams of electrolyte, depending on the context. I put just under half a gram of salt in per bottle portion. I have estimated the cost of that to be 1p. Salt is very, very cheap. And now, my drink in my bottle is kind of isotonic. I have not worked out the exact tonicity values to tell you that that's perfectly true, but give or take, it's isotonic. Something else I do is I put in food grade citric acid. Please don't confuse this with sodium citrate. They are 2 halves of a whole, if you like. Citric acid means that all 3 of the acid groups on this molecule have protons on hydrogen atoms. And I put it in for flavouring. I put it in to put a bit of tang against the background of sweet, which is really important to me. If I'm going to be drinking something for hours, I want a bit of tang against it. Sodium citrate, people add as an alternative sodium source to table salt or something, because it tastes a bit less salty. It may be more palatable to you. Sodium citrate, I would say it's the same molecule as citric acid, just those protons have come off and sodium counterions balance it instead, and it's the sodium that people use it for. It's more expensive than salt, so I don't bother. Then, okay, that's now actually, I would say, a really efficient, high quality sports drink for all day. The last thing I do, if I'm doing a ride that's between 6 and 12 hours, there's some evidence to suggest that taking in protein as you go can somewhat delay muscle degradation. Now, for a 3 or 4 hour ride, who cares? And this is the most expensive and the least reliable science, so who cares? I don't put it in. But if I'm doing a 6 to 12 hour ride, that being a maybe, I think is worth having. Where are we? Here. This is Bcaa powder. Now, BCAAs are branched chain amino acids. All proteins are made of amino acids. By putting in Bcaa or EAA, which is essential amino acids, you're basically doing the work of the body, breaking down a protein in advance into its building blocks. Sticking these in your bottle can help. Potentially, they don't taste very nice, they don't dissolve very quickly, and the evidence on them is limited. It's also, just for 5 grams in my litre bottle, it adds 20 pence to my formulation. So, totally up to you. If you think that that's a gamble worth taking, I'd recommend putting them in. If you don't bother. So this is my final recipe. I'll put it up now. For an 80 gram sports mix, give or take, I'd do that in a 750ml bottle, probably. 46 grams of maltodextrin, 34 grams of fructose, 5 grams BCAAs, about half a gram, less than half a gram, maybe 200 milligrams of citric acid, 300 milligrams of salt maybe, and it tastes quite nice. And that's what I've got made up in this Go bottle. It's in there. So I just keep all of my old sports nutrition, an old scoop, and I just scoop this straight in. The joy of this is you can buy these big bags and you can make up a mix ready to go, times that by each of those by 10 or 20 or 50. Mix them all together in a big mixing bowl and just use your hands. Just stir with your hands or a big wooden spoon until you think it's homogeneous. Pour it into one of these, and then, for good measure, I would give this a really good shake so you're confident your mix is homogeneous. And that's it. That is Nick Brownbill's sports nutrition mix. What I would say is some people talk about gastrointestinal issues. I can never work out if that's a polite euphemism for vomiting or shitting yourself. I don't get gastrointestinal issues when I use these. Maybe I'm just lucky. Acid reflux, I guess, is sort of a gastrointestinal issue, and maybe a tiny bit of that I get. And people talk about Moreton? I don't really know how it's pronounced. But this brand that supposedly does it better. It's supposedly softer on your gastrointestinal tract. And what they add is a polymer called sodium alginate. You can buy this and you can add it. It'll be more expensive. What's cool about sodium alginate is that it's also a polysaccharide, by the way, but you're not going to be getting any carbs from it, is that this alginate molecule is a long chain that has an acid group hanging off it. When it's in its sodium salt form, it's water soluble. When you drink it, the moment it contacts your stomach acid, it switches out that sodium for a proton. It becomes solid. It's not water soluble anymore. So literally, physically in your esophagus, as it goes down, it hits the point that you've got acid reflux and it becomes solid and it pushes that down. That partly neutralises this stomach acid so it's less burny and partly clears it out of your esophagus. It's one of the ingredients in Gaviscon. If you have real issues with that, I'd really recommend putting sodium alginate in your sports mix. If you don't have real issues with that, it's a waste of money, and also, if you want to be like trying to squeeze out chewing gum poo, that's a sure way. Drink loads of sodium alginate. That sounds like my worst nightmare. I am not eating that stuff unless I absolutely have to. Some people put vitamin C in their bottle. There's no real evidence that that will do anything for you positively, nutritionally. I've addressed that some people put sodium citrate in. That's a flavour preference. And some people wouldn't like this because it's unflavoured. I think you can probably buy flavouring sachets. They'll add cost. And my issue is that they've all got artificial sweeteners in. I try and avoid artificial sweeteners anyway. Also, it'd just be too sweet. Having 80 grams of sugar plus artificial sweetener on top, I couldn't cope. If I could find a lemon flavour powder without the artificial sweetener added, I'd probably put some of that in. But as it is, this stuff's fine. So 2 other things that I've been putting in my bottle recently is a pre-race drink. Beta-alanine. Oh, 3 things. Beta-alanine, creatine, and sodium bicarb. These are all kind of nutritional supplements that do different things. Beta-alanine, if you take 3 to 6 grams daily for 4 weeks, daily for 4 weeks, eventually you saturate your muscles with it, and it helps with explosive power. People put it in pre-workout, but it does not work on an acute level. You cannot have one big dose and then be a stronger sprinter later. You have to build up your amount in your muscles. And after 4 weeks at this amount, you can then take 1 gram a day and keep your muscles saturated. So that's what I've been doing, and I need to order more. Creatine is a dodgy topic among cyclists, I guess. I haven't noticed any particular weight gain with creatine. I've noticed a bit more snap in my sprint, but also, I said this before, I eat a mostly plant-based diet, and you get less like dietary creatine that way. You all eat creatine in meat, it occurs in plants and stuff, but vegetarians get much less creatine in their diet than meat eaters, so I see myself as supplementing just enough to get back to if I was eating meat. The last one is sodium bicarbonate. This is going to be controversial. Before some of the hill climbs I've done, I ate loads and loads of sodium bicarb. For my weight, about 67 kilos, I worked out about 21 grams was the therapeutic amount that I had to drink. Sodium bicarb neutralizes the lactate that builds up in your muscles. I made a little sort of hint there about lactate versus lactic acid. Someone talked about lactic acid build up in your muscles in a paper once, and another group put another RC paper out about how lactic acid doesn't build up in your muscles. Lactate is what's called a conjugate base in science, and citrate is a conjugate base of citric acid. Lactate is the conjugate base of lactic acid. And yes, in the body, you don't actually make lactic acid. You make lactate, but that means there's always a counter ion, which is normally a H+ acid, right? So you've got your conjugate base and you've got proton. As far as I'm concerned, call that lactic acid. That group will be in arses to show off that they're very, very clever. Congratulations. Right. Sodium bicarb, 3 hours before a race. If you drink loads and loads of it, it has an acute benefit for one effort. It is like a single effort, and you will burn through all of the carbonate that you've taken in. And it only works for efforts of 5 minutes or less, really. Those really, really sharp efforts. Supposedly it helps you sprint more than anything. I am not a randomized controlled trial. This is anecdote. But this hill climb season, I was able to put out above threshold efforts without feeling the pain in my legs build up quite as quickly. Whether it's training, whether it's prep, whether it's being fresh, or whether it's 21 grams of bicarb in a bottle 3 hours before with plenty of sugar because that helps you digest it, I don't know. But it's something I will do only for important races in future, maybe 3 or 4 times a year. The reason I say that is because there's a big drawback. There is a really big drawback. And that's that as soon as you drink this, you're basically doing the old primary school science explosive volcano experiment in your stomach. You generate shitloads of CO2. So if you just guzzle a whole 500 mils of, 21 grams bicarb, your stomach's going to expand. It goes through your digestive system, and there's lots of stories of people shitting themselves. And what they say is the best possible dose of bicarb you can have is like 0.1 grams less than will make you shit your pants. I am never going to want to risk shitting my pants at a hill climb. So I've settled on 21 grams because it works for me. I am not going to push it. I never want to push it. It makes you feel horrible. So what I do is I make up this bottle. In fact, I've still just about got the Sharpie where I wrote bicarb on it when I took it to gloss up. Make up this 60 grams of sugar, 21 grams of bicarb, give it a good shake. I put my beta-alanine for the day in it as well. And then over the drive to a hill climb, I will sip this. And my rule of thumb is 2 mouthfuls, and then I can't have another mouthful until I've burped. I know how disgusting that sounds, but if you drink too much, you'll start to feel really sick. You might vomit. So I'll drink a bit, make sure I've alleviated the pressure of the CO2 by burping, have another swig or two. And frankly, if you're going to be in polite company later, I'd consider avoiding it, because after the hill climb, you'll be farting like no one's business. They'll be odourless because they're pure CO2, but still, that's a horrible thing for me to talk about, but I just wanted you guys to know exactly what the realities of using each of these things are. Right, this has gone on obscenely long, absolutely obscenely long, and I really apologise. If you've got any questions about nutrition, please let me know in the comments and I'll try and help. This isn't meant to be a dig, but what I really struggle with is quite often I've talked about whether I should put BCAAs in my bottle or whether I should use creatine. And people will reply as if they're an authority on the matter, just saying, well, I do this. But they're people who've just like, I've read one Cycling Weekly article and it said to put maltodextrin in my bottle, so I put maltodextrin in my bottle, and they think that that is a qualification or a means by which to talk from authority. My advice would be, know that I don't know anything about this beyond having read research papers. If you haven't read research papers, you know even less than me. If you understand the way things get digested, then you know more than me. I just think a lot of the time in cycling, people make the mistake of thinking that because they've read something, they're an authority on a matter, and they're not. So take this video for what it is. This is what I do, and there's been a decent bit of research and understanding going into it, but I'm not an authority. I'm very fallible. Right, let me leave it there. I'll stop waffling. Thanks for watching, guys.